Story 1. The Breathing Walls. Marcus Chen had been a professional spelunker for 11 years when he received the contract to map an unexplored cave system in eastern Kentucky, just outside the Daniel Boone National Forest. The landowner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Halloway, had discovered the entrance while clearing brush on her property in March of 2019. She wanted documentation before deciding whether to open it for commercial tour. Marcus arrived on a cold Saturday morning with his standard equipment: helmet with mounted LED lights, rope systems, climbing gear, GPS mapper, oxygen meter, and enough supplies for a 12-hour expedition. The entrance was a narrow vertical shaft, barely 3 feet wide, hidden beneath a limestone outcropping that had probably concealed it for centuries. The descent into darkness began at 9:15 a.m. Marcus rappelled down the entrance shaft, his headlamp cutting through the blackness as he dropped into the earth. The shaft went down 40 feet before opening into a larger chamber. His boots touched solid ground, and he unclipped from his rope, taking a moment to survey his surroundings. The chamber was roughly circular, about 30 feet in diameter, with a ceiling that arched 20 feet overhead. Stalactites hung like frozen icicles, and the air smelled of minerals and ancient dampness. His oxygen meter read normal levels. Everything seemed standard for an Appalachian cave system. He began his mapping process, taking measurements and photographs, noting the geological features in his digital recorder. Marcus spent the first 3 hours exploring and documenting the main chamber and 2 smaller adjoining passages. The cave was beautiful, with formations that suggested it was several thousand years old. Flowstone cascaded down one wall like a frozen waterfall, and delicate soda straws hung from crevices in the ceiling. He was pleased with the find. This could definitely be developed into a tourist attraction. Around noon, he discovered a narrow passage at the far end of the third chamber, barely wide enough for his shoulders. His instinct told him to mark it and return another day with a partner, but curiosity got the better of him. He could see that the passage opened up after about 50 feet. He squeezed through, his helmet scraping against the limestone ceiling. The passage opened into another chamber, and this is where everything changed. The moment Marcus emerged into this new space, he felt it. The air was different here, warmer somehow, and there was a quality to the silence that felt wrong. He had been in hundreds of caves, and he had learned to trust his instincts underground. Something about this chamber made his skin crawl. He swept his headlamp around, taking in the space. It was smaller than the others, maybe 20 feet across with a low ceiling. The walls were smooth, almost unnaturally so, as if they had been polished. There were no formations here, no stalactites or stalagmites, just smooth stone surfaces. Then he noticed the walls were moving. Not dramatically, not obviously, but moving nonetheless. A gentle, rhythmic expansion and contraction like breathing. Marcus froze, his heart suddenly pounding. He stepped closer to the nearest wall, reaching out a gloved hand. The moment his fingers made contact, he felt it pulse beneath his touch, warm and somehow alive. He jerked his hand back, stumbling backward. This was impossible. Stone did not breathe. Stone was not warm. His scientific mind raced for explanations. Perhaps it was an optical illusion caused by his headlamp. Perhaps the warmth was from geothermal activity. But even as he formed these rational thoughts, he knew they were wrong. He had felt it. The wall had moved beneath his hand like living tissue. Marcus decided to leave immediately. He turned toward the narrow passage he had squeezed through but stopped short. The opening was gone. Where there had been a clear passage 15 minutes earlier, there was now solid stone. He approached the wall, running his hands across the smooth surface, searching for any crack or crevice. Nothing. The passage had simply ceased to exist. Panic began to claw at his chest, but he forced it down. He was a professional. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps he was disoriented, looking at the wrong wall. He turned slowly, examining each wall of the chamber, but there were no openings anywhere. He was sealed in. The breathing grew stronger. The walls expanded and contracted with a rhythm that reminded Marcus of lungs, a steady in and out that seemed to echo in the confined space. The temperature was rising. He checked his oxygen meter. The levels were dropping, slowly but steadily. The chamber was consuming the oxygen, breathing it in. Marcus fought to control his rising terror. He began to examine the walls more carefully, looking for any weakness, any crack that might indicate where the passage had been. As he searched, he noticed something else. The chamber was getting smaller. Each time the walls contracted, they did not quite expand back to their original position. The breathing was drawing inward, the space shrinking by inches with each cycle. Marcus attacked the wall where he thought the passage had been, using his climbing hammer to strike at the stone. The impacts produced dull thuds that seemed to be absorbed by the rock rather than echoing. He struck again and again, but the stone would not crack or chip. It was as if he were hitting rubber rather than limestone. Sweat poured down his face. His oxygen meter alarm began to beep. The air was becoming thin. The chamber was now noticeably smaller. He could no longer stand fully upright without his helmet scraping the ceiling. The walls were warm to the touch now, almost hot. The breathing sound had become louder, a deep rhythmic whooshing that filled his ears and seemed to vibrate through his bones. Time lost meaning. Marcus did not know if minutes or hours passed. He tried everything he could think of. He used his rope to search for any opening in the ceiling. He dug at the floor with his tools. He shouted into his radio, though he knew no signal could penetrate this deep underground. The chamber continued to shrink. He was forced to his knees, then to a sitting position. The walls pressed against his shoulders. He could feel them moving against his body with each breath cycle. The heat was intense now. His water was gone. His oxygen meter showed dangerous levels. He began to hallucinate, seeing faces in the smooth stone, hearing whispers in the breathing sound. Then suddenly, Marcus was being squeezed. The walls pressed against him from all sides, warm and firm like a python constricting its prey. He could not expand his chest to breathe. His ribs creaked under the pressure. This was it. He was going to be crushed or suffocated in a living cave that nobody would ever find. His vision began to tunnel. In his final moments of consciousness, Marcus felt the chamber pulse one more time, and then he was moving, being pushed somehow through stone that should have been solid but felt more like thick mud. The pressure was enormous, squeezing every part of his body at once. He woke up outside the cave entrance, lying in the leaf litter, Mrs. Halloway standing over him. It was dark. She told him it was Sunday evening. He had been underground for 33 hours. His equipment was still with him, everything except his helmet. His body was covered in bruises, and his clothes were covered in a thin layer of what looked like mucus. When he checked his GPS mapper and camera, all the data from the breathing chamber was gone, wiped. The memory cards were blank for that entire section of the cave. He tried to tell Mrs. Halloway what happened, but the words sounded insane even to his own ears. She just nodded slowly and said 4 other cavers had gone down there over the past 60 years. He was the first to come back out. Marcus never entered another cave. He moved to Arizona, to the desert, where everything is open and the earth does not breathe. But sometimes at night, he still wakes up feeling walls pressing against him, and he swears he can hear that rhythmic whooshing sound, like the earth breathing in its sleep. Story 2. The Ascending Cave. Jennifer Morrison had been exploring caves in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest for 7 years as part of her graduate research in geology. On October 12, 2017, she entered a moderately challenging cave system called Hollow Ridge Cave with 2 other researchers, David Park and Amanda Chen. They were studying mineral deposits and had permits for a 3-day underground expedition. The cave was well documented with over 2 miles of mapped passages, and they planned to explore a section that showed promising mineral formations. They entered at dawn, each carrying 70 pounds of gear, food, and scientific equipment. The entrance was a moderate slope that descended into a main gallery, a large chamber from which multiple passages branched off like the spokes of a wheel. The first day went according to plan. They set up a base camp in the main gallery and explored two of the northern passages, taking core samples and photographs. The cave was stable, beautiful, and exactly what they had hoped for. That night, they slept in their sleeping bags on the cave floor, comfortable in the steady 54-degree temperature that caves maintain year-round. Jennifer woke on the second day feeling refreshed and excited. They planned to explore the western passage, which the maps indicated descended further into a lower chamber system. They packed light, taking only essential gear, and headed out at 8 a.m. by their synchronized watches. The western passage was narrow, requiring them to move single file, sometimes crawling through tight sections. David led, followed by Amanda, with Jennifer bringing up the rear. After 40 minutes of steady movement, the passage opened into a chamber the maps had labeled as Cathedral Hall due to its impressive height. They emerged onto a ledge about 20 feet above the chamber floor, with handholds carved into the rock face, presumably by previous explorers. Carefully and stood in the chamber admiring the formations. It was here that Jennifer first noticed something odd. According to her compass, they should have been heading west, but the needle was spinning slowly, unable to find magnetic north. She tapped it, thinking it was malfunctioning. David suggested they continue deeper. A passage at the far end of Cathedral Hall led downward at a steep angle. They followed it, using ropes to navigate the descent. After another hour, they reached what should have been the deepest point of the mapped cave system, a chamber marked on the maps as the terminus. But when they arrived, something was wrong. The chamber was identical to Cathedral Hall, complete with the same formations, the same ledge 20 feet up, even the same carved handholds in the rock face. Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. This made no geological sense. These formations took thousands of years to develop. They could not possibly be duplicated exactly in a different chamber. Amanda noticed it next. "We're higher," she said, checking her altimeter. The device measured elevation using barometric pressure. According to the reading, they were now 150 feet higher than when they had first entered Cathedral Hall, despite having descended continuously for over an hour. David checked his own altimeter. Same reading. They compared their route map. By all accounts, they should be at least 400 feet below their starting point. Instead, they were higher than when they began. Jennifer suggested they return to base camp immediately. Something was very wrong with this cave. They started back the way they had come, climbing up the steep passage that should have led them back to the original Cathedral Hall. After an hour of climbing upward, they emerged into another chamber. It was Cathedral Hall again, identical in every detail. But according to their altimeters, they were now 300 feet higher than the cave entrance. They had gone up when they should have gone down. David's voice was tight with stress. "This is impossible. We must be misreading the equipment." But all three altimeters showed the same measurements, and all three compasses spun uselessly. Jennifer made a decision. They would mark their path clearly and try a different passage. Using spray paint from her pack, she marked a large X on the chamber wall with the date and time. They chose the eastern passage, one they had not explored yet, and began moving through it. This passage was larger, easier to navigate, and after 30 minutes they emerged into another chamber. Jennifer's blood ran cold. It was Cathedral Hall again, and there on the wall was her spray-painted X with the date and 30 minutes earlier. They had walked in a straight line through a passage and returned to their starting point, but according to their altimeters, they were now 450 feet higher than the cave entrance. They were ascending while trying to go down. The three researchers sat down to think. Amanda was shaking, close to panic. David suggested they try going down, deliberately descending to see if that would take them up and out. It seemed illogical, but nothing else made sense. They found a passage that clearly descended at a sharp angle and followed it. The descent was treacherous, requiring rope work and careful climbing. After 2 hours of steady downward movement, they emerged onto a ledge 20 feet above a large chamber, Cathedral Hall. The spray-painted X was still on the wall. The altimeter now read 600 feet above the cave entrance. They were ascending into the earth instead of descending out of it. Time became difficult to track. They tried every passage they could find. Each one led back to Cathedral Hall, and each time they were higher than before. Their water was running low. Jennifer tried to stay calm, tried to think scientifically, but there was no scientific explanation for this. They were trapped in an impossible loop, climbing higher into the mountain even when they descended, as if the cave itself had become twisted in a way that defied three-dimensional space. David suggested they try to climb down from the ledge into Cathedral Hall from above, to approach it from a different angle. Using their ropes, they rappelled down the rock face. When they reached the chamber floor and turned around, they were standing on the ledge 20 feet up. They had climbed down and ended up above where they started. Amanda began to cry. The laws of physics had stopped applying. They were in a space that should not exist, where up was down and down was up, where every path led to the same chamber but at a higher elevation each time. They had been underground for over 24 hours since entering the Western Passage. Their food was gone. They had perhaps 6 hours of water left. Jennifer remembered something from her geology courses, a theoretical concept about cavern systems with unusual gravitational anomalies. She did not fully understand it, but the idea was that certain geological formations could create localized distortions in space. What if they stopped trying to navigate logically? What if they just picked a direction and kept going, ignoring their instruments, ignoring what seemed possible? She explained this to the others. They had nothing to lose. They chose a passage at random and started. This time, they did not check their altimeters. They did not look at their compasses. They just walked, ignoring passages that branched off, ignoring chambers they passed through. They walked for hours. Jennifer lost track of how long they walked. Her legs burned. Her throat was parched. She began to hallucinate, seeing impossible things in the darkness beyond her headlamp. And then suddenly, fresh air, cool wind on her face. They stumbled out of a cave entrance none of them recognized, emerging into bright afternoon sunlight. They were on a mountainside they did not recognize, nowhere near where they had entered. David's GPS unit, which had not worked underground, suddenly acquired a signal. They were 17 miles northeast of Hollow Ridge Cave, on the far side of the mountain range. It should have taken days of hiking to reach this location. Their altimeters showed they were 2,000 feet higher than the Hollow Ridge entrance. A search and rescue team found them that evening, dehydrated and exhausted but alive. They had been missing for 4 days. The team told them that Hollow Ridge Cave had been thoroughly searched. There was no Western Passage. The maps they carried showed a passage that did not exist in the actual cave. The geological survey company that had created the maps had no record of ever mapping Hollow Ridge. The maps simply appeared in the university archives with no provenance. Jennifer, David, and Amanda all left the field of spelunking. Jennifer now teaches high school science in Florida. She never talks about what happened in the ascending cave, where they climbed higher by going down, where the laws of physics bent and broke. Sometimes she dreams about it, about walking forever through stone corridors that loop and twist in impossible ways, always climbing, never reaching the surface. She wakes up checking her altitude, making sure she is still at sea level, still in the world that makes sense. Story 3. The Echo That Answered Back. Thomas Bridger worked as a cave rescue specialist in the Appalachian Mountains, based out of Blacksburg, Virginia. In his 15-year career, he had pulled dozens of injured cavers from dangerous situations, navigating some of the most treacherous underground systems in the eastern United States. On February 8, 2016, he received an emergency call about a solo caver who had triggered a personal locator beacon inside Whitestone Cave, a complex system in the Appalachian Mountains known for its acoustic anomalies. The caver, identified as Robert Marsh, had not reported in for over 12 hours. He assembled his gear, checked his communications equipment, and entered Whitestone Cave at 4 p.m. with two other rescue specialists, Sarah Chen and Mike Roberts. Whitestone Cave was notorious among rescue workers. The limestone composition created strange sound properties. Voices echoed in unusual ways, sometimes bouncing back distorted or seeming to come from the wrong direction. Experienced cavers knew not to rely on sound for navigation inside Whitestone. Thomas had been inside twice before and knew the main routes. Robert's locator beacon placed him approximately 1 mile into the system, in an area called the resonance chamber, a large cavity known for particularly strange acoustics. The rescue team moved efficiently through the entrance passages, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness as they navigated familiar terrain. They reached the resonance chamber at 5:30 p.m. It was a massive space, roughly 100 feet in diameter with a domed ceiling that rose 60 feet overhead. The chamber was empty. There was no sign of Robert Marsh. Thomas checked the beacon tracker. The signal was definitely coming from this chamber, strong and clear, but there was no one here. Sarah suggested Robert might have moved to one of the adjoining passages. They called out, their voices echoing strangely in the huge space. "Robert Marsh, Cave Rescue, can you hear us?" The echo came back distorted, the words stretched and twisted until they were barely recognizable. Then they heard it. A voice calling back from somewhere in the darkness. "I'm here, help me." The voice sounded like it was coming from above them, somewhere in the upper reaches of the chamber. Thomas swept his light across the ceiling but saw nothing except limestone formations. "Robert, where are you? Can you see our lights?" There was a pause, then the voice came again. "I can see you, I'm right here." But the voice was different now, coming from a different direction, from one of the passages leading out of the chamber. Sarah moved toward the passage, calling out, "Keep talking so we can find you." The voice continued, but something was wrong. Thomas realized the voice was responding to them, but not quite correctly. When Sarah asked, "Are you injured?" the voice replied, "I can see you, I'm right here." The same phrase repeated. When Mike called out asking for Robert's exact location, the voice said, "Help me," using the exact same inflection as the first time. Thomas felt uneasy. He had done dozens of cave rescues. People in distress sounded panicked, confused, sometimes incoherent, but they responded to questions. This voice was repeating phrases like a recording. They spent 20 minutes in the chamber and adjacent passages, following the voice as it called out from different directions. But every time they got close to where the sound seemed to originate, it would shift, coming from somewhere else. The voice kept repeating the same phrases. "I'm here, help me. I can see you, I'm right here." Always the same words in the same tone. Thomas called for a halt. They regrouped in the center of the resonance chamber. He checked the beacon tracker again. The signal was still strong, still indicating Robert was in this chamber. But the tracker also showed something else now. There were two signals, both identifying as Robert Marsh's beacon, both coming from different directions. Sarah's voice was tight with stress. "That's not possible. He only had one beacon." Thomas agreed. Each personal locator beacon had a unique identifier. There could not be two with the same ID. Yet the tracker clearly showed two signals. As they watched, a third signal appeared, then a fourth. Within minutes, the tracker showed dozens of signals, all identified as Robert Marsh, all coming from different points around the chamber. The voice kept calling from the darkness, but now there were multiple voices, all saying the same phrases, overlapping and echoing off each other in a cacophony of distorted sound. Mike's headlamp flickered and died. He cursed, pulling out his backup light, but it would not turn on. Sarah's lamp flickered next, the beam becoming intermittent. Thomas felt a cold dread settling in his chest. Something was very wrong. This was not a normal rescue situation. He made the decision. We're leaving now, back the way we came. Sarah and Mike did not argue. They turned toward the passage they had entered through, moving quickly. The voices followed them, calling out from behind. I'm here. Help me, I can see you. But now there was something mocking in the tone, something that did not sound human. As they hurried through the passages, Thomas noticed their lights were behaving strangely. The beams seemed to be bending, curving through the air instead of traveling straight. When he pointed his light at the cave wall, the illuminated spot appeared several feet to the left of where he was aiming. The sound of their footsteps echoed wrong, coming back to them from directions that made no sense. Sarah stumbled, catching herself against the cave wall, and let out a shocked cry. Thomas turned to help her, and his light caught what she was staring at. There were handprints on the cave wall, dozens of them, painted in what looked like mud or clay, all reaching toward the passage ahead as if trying to grab something. They kept moving. The voices were behind them, ahead of them, all around them. I'm right here, the voices called. Help me, I can see you. Thomas realized with mounting horror that the voices were mimicking them now. When Sarah had cried out after stumbling, one of the voices echoed her exact sound. When Mike swore under his breath, the voice repeated his exact words in his exact tone. The cave was listening to them and throwing their own sounds back in twisted forms. The beacon tracker had gone haywire, showing hundreds of signals, the screen a mass of overlapping indicators. They reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. Thomas was certain they had come from the left passage, but when he looked at it, it seemed wrong, too narrow. Sarah thought they had come from the center passage. Mike insisted it was the right passage. They stood arguing, their voices rising in panic, and the cave echoed back their argument, voices coming from all 3 passages repeating their words in jumbled order. Thomas forced himself to calm down. He pulled out his rope, found where they had tied it earlier as a safety line, and followed it. The rope led them down the center passage. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, much longer than it had been on the way in. Their lights were dimming despite fresh batteries. The air felt thick, harder to breathe, though Thomas's oxygen meter showed normal levels. The voices followed them, and now they were saying new things, things the rescue team had never said. We're lost, the voices called. We'll never leave, stay here, stay in the dark. The words echoed and multiplied, overlapping until they became a roar of sound that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. Thomas saw light ahead, faint but growing stronger. They stumbled toward it, running now, the voices shrieking behind them in a chorus of distorted sound. They burst out of the cave entrance into cold night air, all 3 of them gasping. Mike fell to his knees, vomiting. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. Thomas turned to look back at the cave entrance. For just a moment he saw them, dozens of figures standing just inside the darkness, pale and still, watching. Then they were gone, and there was only the black mouth of the cave. They reported back to their base. A second rescue team was sent in to look for Robert Marsh. They found his body in a small side chamber off the resonance chamber, wedged in a tight crevice. He had been dead for at least 18 hours, dead before Thomas's team had ever entered the cave. He had suffocated, trapped in a space too small to escape from. His personal locator beacon was on his belt, inactive. It had never been turned on. Whatever had called out to Thomas and his team, whatever had mimicked Robert's voice and created dozens of false beacon signals, it had not been Robert. The cave had lured them in with a voice that was not human, with signals that should not have existed. Thomas left cave rescue work 6 months later. He could not bring himself to enter deep caves anymore. In his nightmares, he still hears the voices from Whitestone Cave, calling out in the darkness, mimicking him, saying things he has not said yet but will say in the future, as if the cave exists outside of time and knows what sounds will come from his mouth before he makes them. He lives in the city now, surrounded by noise and light, but sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, he hears it, a distant voice, echoing from somewhere deep below, calling his name in his own voice, inviting him back into the resonance chamber where sound bends and breaks and becomes something hungry. Story 4. The Calcified Cavers. Dr. Rebecca Walsh was a paleoanthropologist from the University of North Carolina, specializing in prehistoric cave dwellings in the Appalachian region. In November 2018, a spelunking club from Virginia Tech reported discovering what appeared to be ancient artifacts in an unexplored section of Grotto Cave in southern West Virginia. Rebecca received permission to investigate, hoping to find evidence of early human habitation. She entered the cave on November 19th with her research assistant, James Okonkwo, and a local cave guide named Patricia Simmons, who knew the grotto system intimately. They carried archaeological tools, sample collection equipment, climbing gear, and supplies for a 2-day expedition. The cave entrance was a horizontal opening at the base of a limestone cliff, wide enough to walk through upright. The main passage extended 300 yards into the mountain before branching into multiple smaller passages. Patricia led them to the section where the spelunking club had reported finding artifacts. It was a chamber accessible only through a tight squeeze, a horizontal crack in the rock barely 18 inches high. Patricia went first, demonstrating the technique, lying flat and pulling yourself through with your arms while pushing with your toes. The squeeze was about 12 feet long. Rebecca followed, fighting claustrophobia as stone pressed against her back and chest simultaneously. She emerged into a chamber on the other side, standing up and brushing limestone dust from her clothes. The chamber was roughly circular, about 40 feet across, with a ceiling 10 feet high. What caught Rebecca's attention immediately were the formations along the walls, dozens of smooth columns of calcite that looked almost architectural, like pillars in an ancient temple. But as she looked more closely, her archaeological training kicked in. These were not natural formations. The proportions were wrong, the spacing too regular. She approached the nearest column, examining it with her flashlight. Then she saw the hand. Encased in translucent calcite perfectly preserved was a human hand, fingers extended as if reaching out. Rebecca gasped, stepping back. James and Patricia came to look. As their lights played across the chamber, the horrible truth became clear. The columns were not geological formations. They were people. Dozens of people, completely encased in calcite, fossilized while standing upright. Through the translucent mineral, Rebecca could see their bodies, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and confusion. Some had their mouths open as if screaming. Others had hands raised to their faces or reaching out. They were like statues, but too detailed, too perfectly preserved. These were not ancient remains. The clothing visible through the calcite was modern: jeans, hiking boots, jackets. Patricia's voice was shaking. "I've been guiding in these caves for 20 years. I've never seen this chamber before, and I've never heard of anything like this." Rebecca was trying to think scientifically, but her hands were trembling as she took photographs. Calcification was a natural process in limestone caves, but this degree of encasement would take thousands of years, not the weeks or months that the modern clothing suggested. She examined one figure more closely. A man, perhaps in his 30s, wearing a fleece jacket and climbing harness. Through the calcite, she could see his expression of shock. His eyes were open, staring. James noticed the date. Carved into the cave floor at the base of one of the calcified figures was 6/12/2018, and initials MR 5 months ago. Someone had been alive 5 months ago and was now completely fossilized. Rebecca felt her scientific worldview cracking. This was impossible. She counted the figures. 23 calcified people, arranged around the chamber like sentries. Some were alone, others appeared to be in groups, as if they had been with companions when whatever happened to them occurred. Patricia pointed out that none of the figures were touching each other. They all stood isolated, separated by at least a few feet. Then Rebecca noticed the walls were wet. Water was seeping from the limestone, running down in thin streams, but the water was thick, cloudy with dissolved minerals. This was the calcification. Mineral-saturated water but flowing at an impossible rate. Even in the most mineral-rich cave systems, calcification was a process measured in centuries. Here, water was depositing calcite so rapidly that she could see it happening. A thin film was forming on the floor, on the walls, even on their equipment where they had set it down. James picked up his backpack and found the bottom coated with a thin layer of white mineral deposit after just a few minutes. Rebecca made the decision to leave and report this to authorities. This was beyond archaeological investigation. This was a hazard, a phenomenon that needed scientific study and probably closure of the cave. They moved toward the squeeze they had entered through, but Patricia stopped short. The opening was smaller. The 18-inch gap had narrowed to perhaps 12 inches. Rebecca thought it must be an optical illusion, but when she measured with her tape measure, Patricia was right. The opening had constricted. Worse, the edges were wet with mineral-rich water and calcite was forming rapidly along the rim of the gap. James tried to squeeze through first, but he was broader in the shoulders than Patricia had been. He got his head and arms through, but his chest stuck. He struggled, trying to push through, but could not make it. He backed out, his shirt soaked with mineral water. Rebecca tried next. She was smaller, but the opening had narrowed further just in the few minutes they had been trying. She got halfway through before getting stuck, the stone pressing against her chest and back. Patricia helped pull her back. When Rebecca stood up, her shirt was soaked, and calcite was already beginning to form on the wet fabric, stiffening it. They looked at each other in growing horror. The chamber was sealing itself. Rebecca examined the walls more carefully with this new understanding. There were other squeezes, other small openings in the chamber walls, all of them partially closed with calcite buildup. This chamber was a trap. It lured people in through openings that then sealed behind them. The mineral water did the rest, slowly encasing anyone trapped inside in stone. She looked at the calcified figures again, understanding now that they had all died here, slowly fossilized while still alive, unable to escape through openings that closed behind them. Patricia was trying other passages, searching for any exit, but every opening in the chamber was either too small to fit through or actively closing. The mineral water was flowing more rapidly now, as if their presence had triggered something. It ran down the walls in sheets, pooled on the floor, dripped from the ceiling. Everywhere calcite formed. Rebecca felt droplets hitting her helmet, her shoulders. She wiped her hand across her forehead and felt the grit of minerals. They had perhaps an hour before the only viable exit would be completely sealed. James had an idea. They had chemical heating packs in their emergency supplies, used for hypothermia treatment. Calcite formation was accelerated by cold water. If they could warm the rock around the squeeze, they might slow or stop the mineral deposition long enough to get through. They activated all 6 heating packs and pressed them against the stone around the narrowing gap. They waited, watching the calcite formation. It did not stop, but it seemed to slow. The water flowing over the heated areas steamed slightly. Rebecca went first this time, stripping down to her tank top to reduce bulk. She exhaled all the air from her lungs and pushed into the squeeze. The hot stone burned against her skin. She could feel the rough calcite scraping her back and chest. She was stuck. She could not move forward or backward. Patricia and James grabbed her legs and pushed hard. Rebecca screamed as the stone tore her skin, but she moved inch by inch. Her shoulders scraped through, then her chest. She pulled with her arms, and suddenly she was through, lying in the passage on the other side, bleeding from a dozen scrapes and cuts. James came next, pushing through with Patricia helping from behind. He barely made it, emerging with his back torn and bleeding. They reached back through for Patricia. She was halfway through when the heating packs gave out. The stone was cooling. Patricia felt it closing on her, the squeeze tightening around her ribs. She screamed. James and Rebecca pulled with all their strength. Something cracked and Patricia shrieked in pain, but she came through, her left shoulder dislocated, her body covered in blood and mineral slurry. They fled through the cave passages, not stopping until they reached the entrance. Outside in the cold November air, they collapsed. Patricia's shoulder was badly injured, and all three were covered in blood and white mineral deposits. They were evacuated to a hospital. The next day, a team from the U.S. Geological Survey went into Grotto Cave to investigate. They could not find the chamber. The squeeze Rebecca described was there, but it opened into a small dead-end cavity barely 6 feet across with no other passages and no calcified figures. The USGS team found no evidence of unusual mineral deposition rates. Their official report concluded that the research team had likely experienced a panic attack and hallucinated due to stress in confined spaces. But Rebecca's samples she had collected. She had scraped calcite from one of the figures before they escaped. When she examined it in her lab, she found organic material embedded in the mineral: human tissue, skin cells, hair follicles. Carbon dating put the age at approximately 5 months. DNA analysis identified the individual as Marcus Reed, a caver from Ohio who had been reported missing in June 2018 after entering Grotto Cave alone. His body was never found. Rebecca sealed the samples in her safe and left academia. She could not explain what they had seen in that chamber, where time moved differently and calcification occurred in minutes instead of millennia. She burned her field notes and photographs, trying to erase the memory of those 23 figures frozen in stone, their eyes still open, watching as new visitors entered their tomb. Sometimes she wakes at night feeling water dripping on her skin, and she checks herself frantically in the mirror, searching for the white crust of calcite forming on her flesh, entombing her inch by inch in stone. Story 5. The Cave That Moved. Daniel Foster had been working as a mine safety inspector for 12 years, but his real passion was caving. He had explored over 300 cave systems across the Appalachians. In July 2020, he took a week's vacation to explore a newly discovered cave in eastern Tennessee, near the Cherokee National Forest. The cave, which locals called Shifting Stone Cave, had been found by hikers just 3 months earlier. It was not yet officially surveyed or named. Daniel obtained permission from the landowner and entered alone on July 14th at 7 a.m. He was experienced with solo caving, always taking extensive safety precautions, multiple light sources, extra batteries, backup rope, emergency beacon, and a detailed timeline shared with his partner Michelle, who expected him to check in every 6 hours via satellite messenger. The entrance was a steep descending passage, angled at about 45 degrees, requiring careful climbing over loose rock. Daniel navigated it slowly, testing each handhold. After 50 feet, the passage leveled out into a horizontal tunnel, about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, perfectly comfortable for moving through in a crouch. The walls were smooth limestone, with occasional veins of quartz that glittered in his headlamp. He was impressed by the beauty of the formations. This cave would be popular with spelunkers once word. He moved deeper, marking his path with small reflective tags that would help him navigate back. This was standard practice for exploring unmapped caves. After an hour of exploration, Daniel entered a chamber he estimated was about 50 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a ceiling 15 feet overhead. Beautiful columns connected floor to ceiling where stalactites and stalagmites had met and fused over millennia. He took photographs, noting GPS coordinates and sketching a rough map in his notebook. He was about half a mile from the entrance, maybe 150 feet below ground level. The chamber had 3 exits, the passage he had entered through and 2 others leading off in different directions. He decided to explore the passage on his left first, marking it with a large reflective arrow pointing back toward his entry point. The left passage twisted and turned, descending gradually. After 20 minutes, it opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, roughly circular and about 20 feet in diameter. Daniel spent a few minutes examining the mineral deposits on the walls and taking samples. Then he headed back toward the first chamber, following his reflective trail markers. But something was wrong. He emerged into a chamber that was not the one he had left. It was similar in size, but the columns were arranged differently. The ceiling was lower. And there were 4 exit passages instead of 3. Daniel felt a flutter of concern but pushed it down. He must have gotten turned around, entered a different chamber. Easy mistake in an unmapped cave. He checked his GPS unit. The coordinates showed he was in exactly the location where the first chamber should be, but this was definitely not the same space. He examined the passages, looking for his reflective markers. He found them, including the large arrow he had placed to mark his entry point, but the arrow was pointing to a different passage than he remembered. Daniel decided to trust his markers. He had placed them carefully. He must be misremembering the chamber's layout. He followed the arrow back the way it indicated, but instead of leading him toward the entrance, the passage took him deeper into the cave system. After 10 minutes of walking, he emerged into yet another chamber, this one larger than the others, with a high dome ceiling and an underground stream running through it. He had not seen any water in this cave before. His concern was turning to worry. He checked his satellite messenger to send an update to Michelle, but the device showed no signal. That was normal this deep underground. He would need to get closer to the entrance for the signal satellites. Daniel decided to backtrack, return to the entrance, and come back another day with better equipment and a partner. He retraced his steps, following his trail markers carefully, but each passage seemed to lead him to new chambers he had not seen before. He walked for 30 minutes, following his own markers, and found himself in a massive chamber with walls that glittered with selenite crystals. It was spectacularly beautiful, but Daniel had no memory of entering it. This should be impossible. He had been marking his path fastidiously, unless the markers had been moved. But who would move them? He was alone in the cave. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of his reflective markers was on the wall exactly where he had placed it, but the passage it pointed to was not there anymore. There was solid stone where the passage opening should be. Daniel approached the wall, running his hands over the smooth limestone. No crack, no opening, just solid rock. He was certain this marker had been pointing to a passage. He had walked through that passage to enter this chamber. Now it simply did not exist. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. Panic would kill him faster than anything else. He sat down and assessed his situation. He had food and water for 3 days. He had light for approximately 48 hours with all his batteries. He had rope and climbing equipment. He just needed to find the entrance. The cave system might be more complex than he had realized, but there was only one entrance and it had to be somewhere. He chose a passage and started walking, no longer trusting his markers. He would rely on dead reckoning and his compass, but the compass was behaving strangely. The needle did not point steadily north. It drifted, swinging slowly as if magnetic north was moving. Daniel tapped it, thinking it was broken, but the needle continued its slow rotation. He walked for what he estimated was 2 hours, passing through chamber after chamber, some familiar, some completely new. He found his reflective markers in impossible places, on ceilings, underwater, in crevices too small for him to have reached. It was as if someone was collecting his markers and redistributing them randomly. Time became difficult to track. His watch showed it was 1 p.m. He had been underground for 6 hours. He should have been out by now, having lunch with Michelle, telling her about the beautiful cave he had found. Instead, he was lost in a system that seemed to be changing around him. He entered a chamber and stopped dead. There on the cave floor were his footprints in the damp clay. He had been in this chamber before, but there was something wrong with the footprints. They led to The trail of footprints walked directly into solid stone and vanished, as if he had walked through the wall like a ghost. Daniel sat down, breathing hard. This was not possible. Caves did not change. Geology was stable. Stone was permanent, but everything he was experiencing suggested otherwise. He thought about the cave's local name, Shifting Stone Cave. The locals knew something. He should have asked more questions before entering. He should have researched the cave's history. He stood up, feeling determination replace fear. He would find a way out. He had survived worse situations. He just needed to think clearly. He tried a new approach. Instead of trying to navigate out, he would follow the airflow. All caves have airflow, and air always flows toward openings. He wet his finger and held it up, feeling for the slightest breeze. There, a faint current of air moving from his left. He followed it, marking his path with small piles of stones instead of reflective tags. The air current led him through a series of tight passages, and he had to crawl through sections barely wide enough for his shoulders. The air was getting fresher. He was close. He emerged into a chamber and saw daylight. A shaft of sunlight came down from a hole in the ceiling, illuminating the space with golden light. Daniel wanted to cry with relief. He was saved. He looked up at the opening. It was about 30 feet above him, a circular hole perhaps 4 feet in diameter. He could climb that. He had rope and ascending equipment. He set up his gear and began to climb, placing protection as he went. The limestone was solid with good holds. He climbed steadily toward the light. As he reached the opening, his hand extended up through the hole into sunshine. He felt grass, felt warm air. He pulled himself up and his head emerged from the cave into daylight. He was looking at a forest, tall trees surrounding a small clearing. But something was wrong. The trees were not right. They were too tall, too straight, and their bark was smooth and silver like birch, but he did not recognize the species. The sky visible through the canopy was the wrong color, a pale greenish blue he had never seen before, and it was silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Complete silence. Daniel pulled himself further out of the hole, and that is when he saw them. Standing at the edge of the clearing were figures, dozens of them, watching him. They were humanoid but not human, too tall and too thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer and shift like oil on water. They did not move or speak, just stood watching him with eyes that were too large and reflected the greenish light. Daniel felt primal terror. This was not Earth. His world. He had climbed out of the cave into somewhere else, somewhere wrong. He dropped back down into the hole, falling, his rope gear ripping free. He hit the chamber floor hard, pain shooting through his ankle. He ignored it, scrambling to his feet and running. He did not care which direction anymore. He just ran through passages, through chambers, falling, crawling, his light bouncing crazily off stone walls. He ran until he could not run anymore, collapsing in a small tunnel, gasping for air. When he finally calmed down enough to think, Daniel realized he had made a terrible mistake. He should have gone through. Maybe those figures, whatever they were, could have helped him. Maybe that strange world had a way back to his own. But he had panicked and fled. Now he was deeper than ever, hopelessly lost. He checked his watch. It showed 7 a.m., but that was impossible. He had entered the cave at 7 a.m., and it had been 1 p.m. last time he checked. Time was moving backward, or his watch was broken, or he was losing his mind. Daniel decided to rest. He ate some of his food, drank water, and tried to form a plan. He would find that chamber with the opening again. He would go through, face whatever was on the other side. It was his only chance. He started moving, trying to retrace his panicked flight. But the cave had changed again. Passages led to new chambers. His stone cairns, his trail markers were nowhere to be found. He walked for hours, finding nothing familiar. He emerged into a chamber and froze. Standing in the center of the chamber was a figure. It was one of those tall, shimmering beings from the other world. It stood motionless, watching him. Daniel could not move, could not breathe. The figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed. Daniel followed the direction. There was a passage, and at the end of it he could see a faint gray light, the entrance. The The figure vanished, simply ceased to exist like it had never been there. Daniel ran toward the light. He emerged from the cave entrance, stumbling into daylight. It was evening. His truck was parked where he had left it. He checked his phone. July 19th. 5 days had passed. He had been underground for 5 days, though it felt like barely 12 hours. There were dozens of missed calls and texts from Michelle. A search and rescue operation was underway. They had searched the cave and found nothing. Daniel drove directly to the sheriff's office and told them he was safe. He did not tell them what had happened inside Shifting Stone Cave. He could not explain it. The entrance was sealed 2 weeks later with concrete and rebar. The official reason was structural instability, danger of collapse. Daniel heard rumors from the rescue workers who had searched for him. They had found things in that cave, passages that appeared and disappeared, chambers that were in different locations each time they entered, footprints that led into walls. They had found one of Daniel's reflective markers embedded inside solid stone, as if it had been placed there when the rock was soft. The cave was dangerous, not because of collapses or bad air, but because it did not follow the rules of normal space. It shifted, changed, connected to places that were not part of this world. Daniel never entered another cave. He quit his job and moved to Kansas, to the flat plains where there are no caves, no holes in the earth that lead to impossible places. But he still has nightmares about the chamber with the opening to the other world, about the figures standing in the greenish light, watching him with their 2 large eyes. And sometimes he wonders, what if he had gone through? What if he had stayed in that other place? Would he have found a way home, or would he have been trapped forever in a world where the sky is the wrong color and the silence is complete? Story 6. The Dripping. Melissa Torres had been an environmental scientist for 8 years, working for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Her specialty was underground water systems and cave ecology. In March 2019, she was assigned to investigate water contamination reports near Raven's Drop Cave in the Cumberland Plateau. Local residents had complained that their well water had developed an unusual taste and odor. Melissa's job was to trace the underground water sources and determine if the cave system was channeling contaminated water into the aquifer. She entered Raven's Drop Cave on March 23rd with a water testing kit, GPS mapper, and standard caving equipment. The entrance was a vertical shaft, 70 feet deep, requiring rappelling equipment to descend. Melissa set up her rappelling gear and descended into darkness. The shaft walls were wet, water seeping from countless tiny cracks and running down in thin streams. This was normal for limestone caves in this region, especially during the rainy season. She touched down at the bottom of the shaft and unclipped from her rope. The chamber at the base was small, perhaps 15 feet across, with a single exit passage leading horizontally into the mountain. She began moving through the passage, taking water samples every 50 feet from puddles and drip points. The passage was comfortable, about 6 feet high, to walk upright. After 30 minutes of sampling, Melissa entered a larger chamber. The ceiling rose to about 20 feet, and the chamber extended perhaps 60 feet in length. What immediately caught her attention was the sound, a constant dripping, dozens of points where water fell from the ceiling into pools below. It was louder than normal cave dripping, more like light rain. She swept her headlamp across the ceiling. Water was dripping from everywhere, falling in steady streams. The floor was covered in shallow pools and the humidity was oppressive. Her clothes were already soaked from the moisture in the air. Melissa began taking samples, labeling each one with location coordinates. The water was clear, odorless, and cold, typical of cave water. But when she checked the pH, she got an unusual reading, highly alkaline, much more than normal groundwater. She took several more samples from different drip points. All showed the same high pH. This could explain the taste and odor complaints. Highly alkaline water had a distinctive, unpleasant taste. She noted the readings in her waterproof field book and decided to explore deeper to find the source of the alkalinity. The chamber had two exit passages. She chose the larger one and continued deeper. The dripping sound grew louder as she progressed. Water was falling more heavily now, like a shower. Her headlamp beam was diffused by the water droplets falling through the air, creating a hazy effect. She was completely soaked, water running down her face, dripping from her clothes. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first. Here the dripping was intense, a continuous sound like being inside a rain cloud. Water fell in sheets from the ceiling. Melissa stopped, wiping water from her eyes. Something felt wrong. The dripping was too uniform, too steady. Natural water drips are irregular, varying in rhythm and intensity. This was like a machine, perfectly regular. She counted. 1 drip per second from each of hundreds of points on the ceiling, all synchronized. Drip, drip, drip like a metronome. She pointed her headlamp at the ceiling, trying to see the source. The limestone was covered in moisture, water beading on every surface, but she could not see specific points where the drops formed. The water seemed to materialize in mid-air, appearing a few inches below the ceiling and then falling. She took more samples. The pH was even higher here, dangerously alkaline. This water would burn skin with prolonged contact. She needed to report this and get a proper geological team out here to investigate the source. She turned to leave, but the passage she had entered through was not there. She was looking at solid wall. Melissa felt a spike of adrenaline. She was certain she had entered from this direction. She walked around the chamber, checking each wall. There were 3 passages leading out of the chamber, but none of them looked familiar. The dripping continued, steady and relentless. Melissa chose the passage that seemed most likely to lead back and started walking. After 10 minutes, she entered a chamber that looked identical to the one she had just left. Same size, same shape, same intense dripping from the ceiling. She checked her GPS mapper. According to the coordinates, she was in a different location, further into the mountain, but the chamber looked exactly the same. She continued through another passage and again entered a chamber identical to the previous 2. The dripping was louder now, almost deafening. Water fell in solid streams, hitting the floor with force. She began to feel the effects of the water. Her skin was tingling, then burning. The alkaline water was caustic, eroding her skin. She tried to wipe the water away, but it was everywhere, falling constantly, soaking through her clothes to her skin. She needed to find her way out immediately. She started running, choosing passages randomly, desperate to find the way back. Each chamber was the same, the relentless dripping, the pools of alkaline water, the hazy air. She lost track of how many chambers she passed through. 10, 20 more. All identical. Melissa's skin was blistering now. She could feel chemical burns forming on her face, her hands, every exposed surface. Her eyes were burning, her vision blurring. The water was eating away at her flesh. She stumbled and fell, her hands splashing into a pool. The pain was intense, like plunging her hands into acid. She screamed, pulling her hands out. The skin was bright red, already starting to peel. She had to get out. She had to find dry air, find a place where the dripping stopped. She ran blindly now, her vision too blurred to see clearly, following passages by feel. She crashed into walls, fell into pools, crawled through tight sections. The dripping followed her everywhere, that steady mechanical rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. It was inside her head now, drowning out her thoughts. She could not think, could not plan. All she could do was move forward, trying to escape the water that was dissolving her alive. Time lost meaning. Melissa did not know if she had been running for minutes or hours. Her body was on fire, every inch of her skin screaming in agony. She could feel her clothes disintegrating, the fabric eaten away by the alkaline water. She was stumbling through the darkness, her flesh peeling away in strips. She wanted to die. The pain was too much, but something deep inside her refused to give up, kept her moving forward. She fell into a pool and could not get up. The water covered her, and she felt it eating away at her face, her lips, her eyelids. She was drowning in acid, her lungs filling with caustic liquid. This was the end. She would dissolve here, become part of the cave water, another mineral dissolved in the eternal dripping. But as consciousness faded, she felt hands on her, pulling her up, dragging her from the pool. She tried to see who had saved her, but her eyes were gone, burned away by the water. Melissa woke up in a hospital. It was April 2nd, 10 days after she had entered Raven's Drop Cave. She had been found by hikers at the base of the entrance shaft, unconscious and severely burned. 70% of her body had chemical burns, her skin peeled away as if by acid. Her eyes were damaged, her vision permanently impaired. The doctors could not explain the nature of the burns. The pattern and severity suggested industrial chemical exposure, but no chemicals were found on her body or clothes. Her equipment was intact, including her water samples, but when tested, the samples showed normal pH levels, nothing alkaline about them. Melissa's memories of the cave were fragmented. She remembered the dripping, the burning, the endless identical chambers. Psychologists called it trauma-induced hallucination, the mind breaking under stress and creating false memories. But Melissa knew what she experienced was real. She had been in a section of that cave that should not exist, where water dripped with mechanical precision and dissolved flesh like acid. A rescue team searched Raven's Drop Cave for any sign of where she had been. They mapped over 2 miles of passages and found nothing matching her description. No chambers with intense dripping, no alkaline water, no evidence that she had gone deeper than the first chamber. But they found something else. In the first chamber, on the wall, written in what appeared to be dried blood, was a message. "The dripping never stops." The handwriting matched Melissa's. She had no memory of writing it. The message was painted over and the cave was closed to public access. The water contamination issue was never resolved. Residents continued to report strange tastes in their well water, but no source was ever found. Melissa retired on medical disability. Her scars never fully healed, her skin remaining red and sensitive. She cannot be in the rain. The feel of water droplets on her skin sends her into panic attacks. She lives in Arizona now, in the driest place she could find, but even there she cannot escape. At night, in the silence before sleep, she hears it. That steady mechanical rhythm, drip, drip, drip. The sound of water falling in dark places beneath the earth, eating away at stone, at flesh, at sanity. And she knows that somewhere in the depths of Raven's Drop Cave, in chambers that move and shift and hide themselves from mappers, the water continues to drip with perfect rhythm, waiting for the next person to wander into its domain and begin to dissolve. Story 7. The Children's Voices. Gary Mitchell was a cave photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. For 20 years, he had specialized in capturing the beauty of underground spaces, and his work had been featured in National Geographic and numerous other publications. In September 2015, he received a commission to photograph Whispering Hollow Cave in northern Georgia, near the Chattahoochee National Forest. The cave was being considered for protected status, and the Nature Conservancy wanted high-quality images for their proposal. Gary entered the cave on September 17th with his photography equipment, professional cameras, portable lights, tripods, and batteries to power everything. He was alone, as he preferred to be when working. Other people disrupted the stillness he needed to capture the perfect image. The entrance to Whispering Hollow Cave was a wide opening at the base of a wooded hillside, large enough to drive a car through. The cave had been used as a shelter by Cherokee people hundreds of years ago, and there were still traces of their presence. Soot marks on the ceiling from ancient fires, fragments of pottery in the dirt. Gary respected the history and was careful not to disturb anything. He moved deep into the cave, the passage gradually narrowing and descending. After 20 minutes of walking, he reached the area he wanted to photograph, a section called the gallery, where the cave opened into a vast chamber filled with spectacular formations. Gary set up his equipment, working methodically. Cave photography required patience and precision. He positioned his lights to highlight the textures and colors of the formations, set his camera on a tripod for long exposures, and began shooting. The work was meditative, peaceful. He was alone in the silent earth, surrounded by beauty that had taken millions of years to form. This was his job. After 2 hours of shooting, he had captured dozens of excellent images. He decided to explore a bit deeper before packing up. There was a passage at the far end of the gallery that was not on the cave map. He wanted to see where it led. The passage was narrow, requiring him to turn sideways in places, but after 50 feet it opened into a smaller chamber. This chamber was different from the others. The formations were minimal, just bare rock walls and a flat floor. What caught Gary's attention was the acoustics. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely, not bouncing back as a simple repeat but fragmenting and layering until it sounded like multiple voices speaking. He said hello and heard it come back as hello, 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 overlapping and out of sync. Interesting. He made a mental note to mention this to the Nature Conservancy. This chamber had unusual acoustic properties that might be worth studying. Then he heard the children. Faint, distant but unmistakable, the sound of children laughing and playing. Gary froze, listening. The sounds were coming from deeper in the cave, from a passage he had not noticed before, a low opening partially hidden behind a rock formation. The laughter continued, high-pitched and joyful, the sound of young kids having fun. Gary was confused. There should not be anyone else in this cave. He had the only permit for today. And what kind of parent would bring small children into a cave this deep? He called out, "Hello, is someone there?" His voice echoed and fragmented. The laughter stopped. Silence. Then a child's voice, clear and close. "Come play with us." Gary felt uneasy. Something about the voice was wrong. It was too clear, too close, as if the child was standing right next to him, but he could see no one. He called out again, "Where are your parents? You shouldn't be in here alone." No response. Then the laughter started again, coming from the hidden passage. Gary made a decision. If there were kids in trouble down here, he had a responsibility to help. He ducked into the low passage and crawled through. It opened into a series of small connected chambers, and the laughter was louder here, seeming to come from all directions at once. He moved through the chambers, following the sound. The voices were singing now, a child's song. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." The voices were sweet and innocent, but hearing them in the dark cave made Gary's skin crawl. He entered a larger chamber and stopped. Around the perimeter of the chamber, carved into the rock, were small niches, each about 3 feet tall. There were dozens of them, arranged in neat rows. Gary approached the nearest niche and shone his light. He recoiled in horror. Inside the niche was a skeleton, small, the bones of a child. He checked the next niche. Another child's skeleton. And the next and the next. Every niche contained the remains of a child, some with scraps of cloth still clinging to the bones, some with toys clutched in their bony hands. Gary backed away, his heart pounding. This was a tomb, a mass grave. These children had died here, been placed in these niches, possibly centuries ago. He needed to report this to authorities immediately. This was an archaeological site, possibly a crime scene. He turned to leave and the voices started again, dozens of them now, children's voices calling out. "Don't leave, stay with us, play our games." The voices were all around him, echoing from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Gary ran. He crashed back through the small chambers, desperate to reach the main cave. The voices followed him, laughing, singing, crying. He burst into the acoustic chamber and kept running, heading for the gallery. But when he reached it, the space was wrong. It was smaller than before and his equipment was gone. All his cameras, lights, tripods, everything had vanished. He was certain this was the gallery. He recognized the formations, but his gear was simply not there. He ran toward the entrance passage but could not find it. The chamber had multiple exits, but none of them led the right direction. He chose one and ran through it, emerging into another chamber he did not recognize. The children's voices were still following him, getting louder. "You can't leave. You're one of us now. Stay and play forever." Gary's rational mind was crumbling. This was impossible. Caves did not change. Dead children did not speak. But he could hear them clearly, dozens of young voices, and he could feel small hands touching him, pulling at his clothes, cold fingers wrapping around his wrists. He fell, and the hands were all over him, pulling him down. He could not see them, but he felt them. Dozens of small hands, child-sized, cold as ice. They were dragging him backward, pulling him toward the chamber of bones. He screamed and fought, kicking out at invisible attackers. His headlamp flickered and went out. He was in complete darkness, and the hands were pulling him across the cave floor. He could hear the children singing, "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Gary managed to pull his backup light from his pocket and turned it on. The hands released him instantly. He was alone in the darkness, no children visible, but he could still hear them whispering now all around him. "The light hurts. Turn it off. Play in the dark with us." Gary kept the light on and ran. He moved through passage after passage, whispers following him. He lost all sense of direction, all sense of time. He just ran, keeping his light pointed ahead, ignoring the voices that begged him to turn it off and play with them in the darkness. He burst out of a passage into fresh air and sunlight. He was outside, but not at the entrance where he had entered. He was on a hillside he did not recognize, the cave opening behind him just a small hole in the rocks. He ran down the hill, crashing through underbrush, until he reached a road. He flagged down a passing car. The driver took one look at his wild eyes and dirt-covered clothes and asked if he needed help. Gary gave him the address of his hotel and rode in silence, too shaken to explain. It was September 20th. He had been in the cave for 3 days, though it had felt like only a few hours. A massive search and rescue operation had been underway. When authorities searched Whispering Hollow Cave, they found his equipment still set up in the gallery, untouched, his cameras containing all the photos he had taken. But they found no chamber of bones, no niches with child skeletons, no hidden passage. The cave was thoroughly mapped, and there was no tomb matching Gary's description. But later research by a local historian uncovered something disturbing. In the 1840s, a traveling group of settlers had camped near Whispering Hollow Cave. An outbreak of scarlet fever had killed 23 children in the group. The survivors had buried the children in a nearby cave, sealing them in niches carved into the rock. The location of the burial cave had been lost to history. Gary's description matched the historical accounts perfectly, but if the Chamber of Bones was in Whispering Hollow Cave, why could no one find it? Gary never worked as a cave photographer again. He could not bring himself to enter darkness. Even being in a windowless room triggered panic attacks. He sold all his equipment and took a job teaching high school photography. He lives in the city now, surrounded by light and noise. But at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, he still hears them. The whispers of children's voices, asking him to come back and play. And sometimes he dreams about the Chamber of Bones, about small cold hands reaching for him from the darkness, pulling him down into the earth to join them forever in their eternal game. Story 8. The Reflection Pool. Catherine Hayes was a hydrologist working for the U.S. Forest Service, specializing in karst topography and underground water systems. In May 2021, she was assigned to investigate unusual water flows in the Appalachian region of Virginia, near the George Washington National Forest. Sinkholes had been appearing in a rural area, and property owners were concerned about subsidence damaging their homes. Catherine's job was to map the underground water channels and determine the cause of the sinkholes. She entered a large cave system called Mirror Lake Cave on May 8th, accompanied by a forest ranger named Tom Blackwell who knew the area well. They carried water tracing equipment, GPS mappers, and standard safety gear. The entrance was a large sinkhole, about 15 feet in diameter, with a metal ladder installed for access. They descended the ladder into a large entrance chamber, then proceeded through well-traveled passages deeper into the system. Mirror Lake Cave was popular with recreational cavers, and the main passages were easy to navigate. After 40 minutes of walking, they reached the cave's namesake feature, Mirror Lake, an underground pool about 50 feet across and perfectly still, its surface so smooth and reflective that it looked like polished glass. Catherine had seen photos of Mirror Lake before, but the reality was even more stunning. The ceiling of the chamber was reflected in the water so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where the real ceiling ended and the reflection began. Catherine began setting up her water testing equipment while Tom took photographs. She needed to measure the depth of the pool, check the flow rate, and determine if this was part of the system causing the sinkholes. She deployed her depth sounder, a device that used sonar to map the underwater contours. The reading came back strange. The pool was showing as 20 feet deep, but the sonar was also detecting a chamber below the water, suggesting the pool was not a natural basin but rather water filling a submerged passage. This was interesting. If water was flowing through a submerged passage, it could explain the sinkhole formation. Tom was standing at the edge of the pool looking at his reflection. "Catherine, look at this." His voice was strange, tight. Catherine walked over. Tom was staring at the water and Catherine looked down at their reflections. Something was wrong. Tom's reflection was not moving in sync with him. He raised his hand, and the reflection raised its hand a split second later as if delayed. Catherine blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. But no, there was definitely a lag. Tom moved his head and the reflection followed slightly behind. Catherine knelt down, looking at her own reflection. It stared back at her, but there was something off about the eyes. Her reflection's expression was different, not quite matching her own. She smiled experimentally and her reflection smiled back, but the smile was wrong, wider, showing too many teeth. Catherine jerked back from the water. "We need to leave, right now." Tom looked at her confused. "What? Why? We just got here." Catherine could not explain the intense feeling of wrongness that had seized her. Her scientific training told her she was being irrational, but her instincts screamed danger. "Please, Tom. Something is wrong with this water. We need to go." Tom looked back at the pool and his reflection looked back at him. The reflection's mouth moved and Catherine heard words, faint but clear. "Don't go, stay with us." Tom stumbled backward. "Did you hear that? Did you see that? My reflection talked." Catherine grabbed his arm. "We're leaving, now." They turned toward the passage they had entered through but stopped. Standing at the edge of the pool where they had just been standing were their reflections. Not in the water, but standing on solid ground like physical beings. The reflections looked exactly like them, down to every detail of clothing and equipment, but something was deeply wrong. Their eyes were empty, dark voids. They were smiling and the smiles were predatory. Catherine and Tom ran. They sprinted through the passages, not looking back. Behind them, they could hear footsteps, the sound of their reflections chasing them. The passage seemed longer than Catherine remembered, stretching on forever. Tom was gasping, out of breath. "They're catching up." Catherine glanced back and saw them. Two figures that looked exactly like her and Tom, running with impossible speed, their faces twisted in those horrible smiles. They reached a junction where the passage split. Catherine went left, Tom went right. Catherine ran through narrow passages, crawling through tight sections, trying to lose her pursuer. She emerged into a small chamber and risked a look back. Nothing. The passage behind her was empty. She had lost it. She caught her breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Then she heard Tom screaming. The sound was coming from somewhere deeper in the cave, echoing through the passages. "Catherine, help me, it's got me." Catherine hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, to get out of the cave. but she could not leave Tom. She moved toward the screams, following the sound through winding passages. She found him in a small chamber, backed into a corner. Standing between him and the exit was his reflection, the thing with Tom's face and Tom's body, but those empty black eyes. It was reaching for him, moving slowly, savoring his terror. Catherine grabbed a rock and threw it at the reflection. The rock passed through the figure like it was made of smoke. The reflection turned to look at her and saw her own reflection standing beside it. Two figures with familiar faces and empty eyes blocking the only exit. Catherine grabbed Tom's hand. "Close your eyes. Don't look at them." She pulled Tom forward, walking directly toward the reflections with her eyes squeezed shut. She felt cold as she passed through them, a deep chill that went into her bones, but she kept moving, pulling Tom along. They stumbled into the passage and ran. Catherine did not open her eyes until they had put distance between themselves and the chamber. When she finally looked, the reflections were gone. She and Tom kept moving, navigating by memory back toward the entrance. The passages seemed different now, unfamiliar, but Catherine forced herself to stay calm and think logically. They were turned around, but the cave system was not that large. They would find the entrance. They emerged into a chamber with a pool, mirror lake. They were back where they started. Tom made a sound of despair. "No, no, no, no. We ran for 20 minutes. We should be at the entrance." Catherine looked at the pool. The water was still perfectly reflective, perfectly calm. She looked at the surface and saw their reflections staring back. But these reflections were smiling that wrong smile, and they were standing when Catherine and Tom were standing, positioned exactly the same. The reflections raised their hands in perfect synchronization, waving mockingly. Catherine realized the horrible truth. "Tom, when did we pass through the reflections? When did we walk through them?" Tom's eyes widened. "In that chamber, when you told me to close my eyes." Catherine felt sick. "We didn't escape. We went through them. We're on the other side now." Tom shook his head, not understanding. Catherine pointed at the pool. "Look at the water, really look." Tom stared at the pool and gasped. The ceiling reflection was wrong. The stalactites were pointing the wrong direction. No, not wrong. They were seeing the ceiling from below the water. They were seeing the real chamber reflected in the water, which meant they were in the reflection, trapped on the other side of the mirror. They were the reflections now, trapped in a world that was an inverted copy of the real one. Catherine's scientific mind raced. If they were in a reflected world, then maybe they could get back by reversing the process. She grabbed Tom's hand. "We have to go back through, into the water. It's the only way." Tom resisted. "That's insane. We'll drown." Catherine pulled him toward the pool. "We're already drowned. We're already dead. This isn't real. We have to go back." She jumped into the pool, pulling Tom with her. The water was not cold. It was not wet. It was just darkness, empty void. They fell through it, through a space that had no dimensions, no up or down. She felt herself dissolving, becoming less solid, less real. Then they hit water, real water, cold and shocking. They were underwater in Mirror Lake, sinking. Catherine swam upward, pulling Tom. They broke the surface, gasping for air. They swam to the edge and pulled themselves out. They lay on the cave floor, coughing and shaking. Catherine looked at the pool. Their reflections looked back, moving in perfect synchronization now, normal. They had made it back. They had escaped the reflected world. They gathered their equipment left behind when they had run and headed for the entrance. The passages were normal now, familiar. They reached the ladder and climbed out into daylight. It was May 11th. They had been in the cave for 3 days. A search and rescue operation was underway. When they were found, they were both suffering from hypothermia and dehydration. Their clothes were dry, despite both of them insisting they had been underwater. Catherine's water testing equipment was still in the chamber with Mirror Lake, but when recovery teams retrieved it, the device had recorded nothing unusual. The depth of the pool was 20 feet, and there was no submerged passage. The water was normal in every way. Catherine wrote a detailed report of what happened, but it was dismissed as hallucination brought on by stress and dehydration. Tom left his job with the Forest Service and moved away. Catherine stayed, but she never entered another cave. She became an advocate for cave safety, giving lectures about the dangers of solo exploration and the importance of proper equipment. But she never mentioned what she learned in Mirror Lake Cave, that reflections are not just images bouncing off water, but doorways to inverted worlds where your own face stares back at you with empty eyes, where you can become trapped in a copy of reality that is almost but not quite right, forever watching the real world through the surface of still water, reaching out but never touching, never escaping. Story 9. The Growing Dark. Stephen Park had been a professional cave cartographer for 19 years, creating detailed maps of cave systems for scientific and recreational use. His work required precision, patience, and comfort with spending days underground in complete darkness. In August 2017, he accepted a contract to map an unexplored cave system in eastern Kentucky called Hollow Mountain Cave. The cave had been discovered by a mining company while surveying land for possible mineral extraction. They wanted a complete map before deciding whether the cave had any value for tourism or research. Stephen entered Hollow Cave on August 4th with enough supplies for a 5-day expedition: food, water, batteries, mapping equipment, climbing gear, and a satellite messenger for emergency communication. The entrance was a vertical shaft, approximately 100 feet deep, requiring technical rope work to access. Stephen rappelled down the entrance shaft, his headlamp illuminating rough limestone walls as he descended into darkness. The shaft opened into a large chamber at the bottom, easily 60 feet across with a high ceiling. This was promising. Large chambers often connected to extensive passage systems. He began his mapping work, using a laser distance measurer to record precise dimensions, noting geological features, taking photographs. The chamber had 5 exit passages, like spokes radiating from a hub. He marked the entrance shaft as his reference point and began exploring the passages systematically, mapping each one before moving to the next. The first passage led to a series of smaller chambers connected by narrow crawlways. Stephen spent 4 hours mapping this section, working methodically. When he returned to the main chamber, he noticed something odd. The chamber seemed darker. His headlamp was a powerful LED unit, capable of illuminating a large space easily, but the light seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, not penetrating as far as it should. He checked the battery. It showed full charge. He swept his light around the chamber. The 5 exit passages were visible, but the chamber walls seemed further away, as if the space had expanded. Stephen dismissed this as tiredness affecting his perception. He had been working for several hours without rest. He ate a meal, drank water, and began exploring the second passage. This one descended steeply, requiring careful climbing. After 2 hours of mapping, he returned to the main chamber. The darkness was definitely worse. His headlamp beam barely reached the far wall. He could see perhaps 20 feet ahead before the light was swallowed completely. This made no sense. Light does not get absorbed by darkness. Darkness is just the absence of light. But this darkness felt different, felt thick, almost solid. He even checked his backup lights. All showed full batteries. All produced the same weak illumination, barely penetrating the darkness. He decided to move his base camp to a smaller chamber where the light worked normally. He gathered his equipment and headed for the first passage he had mapped. But when he reached where the passage should be, there was only darkness. He shone his light directly at it, but the beam stopped after 15 feet, ending as if hitting a black wall. Beyond that point, nothing was visible. The passage had been 50 feet long. Now he could only see 15 feet before the darkness became impenetrable. Stephen felt the first stirrings of real fear. He moved around the chamber, checking each passage. All of them disappeared into darkness after just a few feet. The darkness was closing in like a fog, but made of shadow instead of mist. He could see the cave floor for about 10 feet around him, a circle of illumination from his headlamp, but beyond that was absolute blackness. The main chamber was being consumed by darkness, eaten away by shadow. He decided to retreat to the entrance shaft. If he could get back to the surface, he could report this phenomenon and return with better equipment, maybe bring a colleague. But when he reached where the entrance shaft should be, there was only darkness. He could not see the rope he had left hanging down from the surface. He could not see the shaft. He looked up, searching for the circle of daylight 100 feet above, but there was only blackness. The darkness had swallowed the exit. Stephen sat down, forcing himself to think rationally. This had to be a natural phenomenon, something he did not understand. Perhaps a gas cloud, some kind of particulate in the air that absorbed light. He checked his air meter. Oxygen levels were normal. He pulled out his satellite messenger to send an emergency signal. The device powered on but could not acquire a satellite signal. This was normal underground, but it meant he could not call for help unless he found the exit. He waited, hoping the phenomenon would pass, hoping the darkness would retreat, but it grew thicker. His circle of visibility shrank from 10 feet to 8, then to 6. The darkness was approaching, slowly but inexorably. Stephen began to notice something else. The darkness was not empty. He could see shapes moving in it, just at the edge of his light, dark forms that slithered and crawled. When he pointed his light directly at them, they vanished, but he could see them in his peripheral vision, circling him. He stood up and started walking, choosing a direction at random. If he could not see the passages, he would navigate by feel. He walked forward, his light creating a small bubble of illumination around him, beyond which was absolute black. He walked for what felt like hours but could have been minutes. Time was difficult to judge. The chamber seemed to go on forever. He should have reached a wall by now, but there was only darkness. The shapes in the dark were getting bolder. He could see them clearly now, crawling things made of shadow, roughly humanoid but wrong, with too many limbs, too many joints. They stayed just beyond his closing in. Stephen broke into a run. He did not know where he was running, but he had to move, had to keep ahead of the things in the darkness. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He collapsed, gasping. When he looked up, the circle of light from his headlamp had shrunk to barely 3 feet. He was surrounded by darkness, and the shadow things were right at the edge of his light, dozens of them, crawling over each other in their eagerness to reach him. Stephen screamed, scrambling backward, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was everywhere. Then his headlamp went out. Not gradually, not flickering, just instantly dead. He was in complete darkness, the kind of darkness that exists only deep underground where no light has ever penetrated. He fumbled for his backup light, his hands shaking. He found it, pressed the button. Nothing. Dead. He grabbed his third light, his emergency backup. Dead. All his lights had failed simultaneously. Stephen was in absolute darkness and he could hear them. The shadow things crawling toward him, making sounds like dry leaves sliding across stone. He felt cold fingers touching his leg, his arm, his face. He screamed and screamed, but there was no one to hear him. The darkness was complete and the things that lived in it were hungry. Stephen was found 12 days later by the mining company's survey team. They found him sitting in the center of the main chamber, completely unresponsive, his eyes open but seeing nothing. All his lights were functional, batteries fully charged. His equipment was undamaged. But Stephen would not speak, would not respond to any stimulus. He had to be carried out of the cave. He was hospitalized for 6 months. Doctors diagnosed him with severe psychological trauma but could not determine the cause. He slowly recovered some functionality, learned to speak again, to eat, to perform basic tasks. But he never really came back. Stephen lives in a nursing facility now, in a room that is kept brightly lit 24 hours a day. If the lights flicker, even for a moment, he starts screaming and does not stop until they are back on. He cannot tolerate darkness of any kind. If someone turns off the lights, he has a complete breakdown, babbling about the things in the dark, about the growing darkness that eats light and flesh, about the shadow things that crawl and hunger. The cave was sealed with concrete, marked as hazardous. The mining company abandoned their survey. But sometimes, hikers near Hollow Mountain report strange phenomena. Areas where flashlights and phones suddenly stop working, where it seems dimmer than it should be, where darkness gathers in pools and eddies like water. And sometimes, at night, people report seeing things crawling out of the sealed cave entrance, shadow forms that avoid light and hunt in the darkness, remnants of the growing dark that consumed Stephen Park's mind and still waits beneath Hollow Mountain for the chance to spread, to consume more light, more sanity, more lives. Story 10. The Exit That Wasn't There. Angela Russo had been exploring caves since she was 16 years old. Now, at 42, she was one of the most experienced cavers in the Appalachian region, with over 500 cave systems explored and documented. In December 2019, she was asked by the Virginia Cave Board to investigate reports of unusual features in a cave called Blackstone Hollow, located in the southwestern mountains. Local cavers had reported passages that seemed to shift, dead ends that sometimes opened into new chambers. The reports were vague and unverified, probably just confused navigation by inexperienced cavers, but Angela agreed to investigate. She entered Blackstone Hollow Cave on December 14th, alone as she preferred. She carried standard equipment plus extra rope, food, and water for a 3-day trip. The entrance was a moderate descent through a boulder field, leading to a horizontal passage. Angela moved through familiar cave terrain for the first several hours. Blackstone Hollow was a well-known system, and she had been here before, 15 years ago. The passages were as she remembered them, tight in places, opening into larger chambers, typical limestone cave formations. She was looking for the area where other cavers had reported the strange shifting passages. According to their descriptions, it was in the northern section, about 2 miles from the entrance. She reached the area by early afternoon and began systematic exploration. She found nothing unusual at first. The passages were stable, the chambers well-formed and permanent. She began to think the reports were just navigation errors. Then she entered a chamber that was not on her old maps. It was medium-sized, roughly 30 feet across, with a low ceiling. What caught her attention was the passage at the far end. It had a wooden door frame around it, old weathered wood that looked like it had been there for a century. But there were no buildings up here, no reason for a door frame to be in a natural cave. Angela approached it cautiously. The frame was hand-carved, the wood oak, the craftsmanship crude but sturdy. The frame was a passage ordinary limestone, nothing unusual. But the frame itself was deeply strange. Why would someone install a door frame in a cave miles from any entrance? She took photographs, examining the frame closely. There were no hinges, no indication that a door had ever been mounted. Just the frame standing there for no apparent reason. Angela stepped through it into the passage beyond. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it, a subtle shift like pressure changing or walking through a temperature gradient. She turned to look back. The door frame was gone. The chamber behind her was different, larger, with 3 exit passages where there had been one. Angela felt disorientation. She must have gotten turned around, entered a different chamber. But no, her footprints were still visible in the cave floor dust, leading from the passage she had come through. This was the same chamber, but changed. Angela decided to backtrack. She returned through the passage she had entered, following her own footprints. But instead of leading back to familiar passages, the trail led her to chambers she had never seen before. After 20 minutes of following her own tracks, she emerged into the chamber with the door frame again. But now the frame was in a different location on a different wall. She approached it carefully. It was the same frame, she was certain, same weathered oak, same crude carving, but it had moved. She marked the frame with spray paint, a bright orange X, and backed away without stepping through it. She chose a different passage out of the chamber and began mapping carefully, making detailed notes of every turn, every feature. After an hour of methodical exploration, she returned to the chamber with the frame. Her orange X was still there, but now there were 3 door frames in the chamber, arranged on different walls. Only one had her spray paint mark. The other 2 were identical but unmarked. Angela felt cold dread settling in her stomach. This was not normal cave geology. This was something else, something impossible. She decided to leave immediately. She would report this and return with a full team and better equipment. She headed back the way she had come, following her mapped route exactly. But the passages did not match her notes. Turns that should have been left were right. Chambers that should have been empty had new passages. After 2 hours of navigation, she was hopelessly lost. She tried using her compass, but the needle spun slowly, not settling on north. She tried her GPS mapper, but the device showed her position as invalid, no coordinates. She was in a space that was not on any map, not part of the known world. Angela forced herself to stay calm. She had been in difficult situations before. She would find a way out. She marked her path with reflective tags and began systematic exploration, trying to map this altered section and find a route to familiar passages. Hours passed. She entered chamber after chamber, passage after passage, and everywhere she found door frames. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all identical, all standing alone with no doors. Sometimes she would find her own tags and realize she was looping back to chambers she had already explored. The cave was not making sense. It was not following the normal rules of 3-dimensional space. She would enter a passage heading north and emerge from it heading south, having somehow turned completely around without any curves or junctions. Angela stopped to rest and eat. She checked her watch. It was 11 p.m. She had been underground for 17 hours. Her batteries were holding, her lights still strong. She had food and water for 2 more days. She could survive if she stayed calm and kept trying. She finished her meal and stood up. That is when she saw it, an exit sign. The kind of illuminated exit sign you would see in a building, glowing green in the darkness. It was hanging from the cave ceiling, impossible, wrong, but there it was. Below it was a door frame, and beyond the frame she could see daylight. Angela approached slowly. This had to be a hallucination. But the sign looked real, the daylight looked real. She could feel fresh air flowing through the frame, could smell pine trees. She stepped through. On the other side was a forest, trees and bushes and natural sunlight filtering through a canopy. She had emerged from the cave into a forest clearing. Behind her, the door frame stood alone, no cave entrance visible. Just the frame, standing in the middle of the clearing, and through it she could see the darkness of the cave she had just left. Angela walked away from the frame into the forest. She would find a trail, find people, get help. She walked for 20 minutes and the forest seemed to go on forever. No trails, no roads, just endless trees. She climbed a hill to get a better view and stopped at the top, her breath catching. She could see the forest stretching in all directions, but it was wrong. The trees were arranged in geometric patterns, perfect grids. The hills repeated in identical formations. This was not a real forest. This was a pattern, a design, something artificially created or mathematically generated. She ran back to the clearing, back to the door frame. She dove through it, back into the cave darkness. She was not getting out that way. That exit led to somewhere that was not Earth, was not even real. Cave passages, desperate now, looking for any exit that was real. She found more door frames, more exits, each one showing something different. A desert, an ocean, a city street, a room in a house. She stepped through one and found herself in what looked like a subway station, but the walls were stone, cave limestone, and there were no trains, no people, just empty platforms extending into darkness. She went back through the frame into the cave and kept running. Time lost meaning. She did not know if hours or days were passing. She ate when hungry, slept when exhausted, woke and kept searching. She found a chamber with 100 door frames, all showing different exits, different worlds. She tried them one by one, but none led to the real surface, the real world. Each one opened onto some place that was almost right but fundamentally wrong. A sky that was too blue, grass that was the wrong shade of green, a sun that gave no warmth. Angela realized the horrible truth. She could not leave because there was no exit. Blackstone Hollow Cave had no entrance or exit anymore. It existed in its own space, connected to the real world by passages that shifted and moved. The door frames were attempts to create exits, but they led to mirror worlds, copies, simulations, anything except the real surface. She was trapped in a cave system that had somehow detached from normal space, drifting in a void where physical laws were suggestions rather than rules. She found a comfortable chamber and set up a permanent camp. She had enough food for maybe 2 more days. Then she would starve, unless she went through one of the false exits and tried to survive in one of those wrong worlds. She spent her remaining time writing notes, documenting everything she had seen, hoping that someday someone would find her body and her notes and understand what had happened. On what she thought was the 3rd day underground, her food ran out. She was weak, tired. She made a decision. She would go through an exit, any exit. She would rather die in one of those strange mirror worlds than slowly starve in the darkness. She chose a door frame at random and stepped through. On the other side was a cave entrance, exactly like the entrance to Blackstone Hollow, the boulder field, the trees, everything correct. She climbed out cautiously, expecting it to be another false world, but it looked right. The sun was the correct color, the air smelled right. She checked her phone. It had signal. The date showed December 18th, 4 days after she had entered. She called for help. A rescue team found her at the cave entrance. She was dehydrated and exhausted but alive. When she tried to explain what happened, they were confused from dehydration. The rescue team searched Blackstone Hollow Cave. They found no door frames, no shifting passages, no chambers matching her description. The cave was normal, stable, exactly as mapped. Angela's notes and photographs were on her camera, but when examined, they showed only normal cave features. The door frames were not in any of her photos. There was no evidence that anything unusual had occurred. Angela left professional caving. She could not trust caves anymore, could not trust that entrances would remain exits, that passages would stay where they should be. She lives in the desert now, far from any caves. But she never forgot the door frames, the false exits, the worlds that were almost but not quite right. And sometimes in cities, in buildings, in ordinary rooms, she sees them. Door frames that look just slightly wrong, thresholds that feel strange to cross. She wonders if she really escaped, or if the world she returned to is just another mirror, another copy, close enough to the real world that she cannot tell the difference. A comfortable prison that looks like home, but is just another room in the infinite cave that has no exit.